Hey everyone, CoolKid here. Autism announcement. Warframe 1999 came out over a year ago. With 1999's release, we got a new gear item in the form of the Atomicycle, which everyone immediately forgot about. Considering its cumbersome controls, limited utility, and propensity for getting stuck, it makes sense why people don't use it much. Thing is, there is one person who did not forget about the Atomicycle, my boyfriend Nitro. He loves this piece of kit, and as I love him, I wanted to see if I could make the Atomicycle Steel Path viable. Besides, it's been a while since I cooked up some nonsense on this channel, so in today's video, we're going to bend the game's rules and make the Atomicycle overpowered. So, for those unfamiliar, the Atomicycle is a summonable vehicle that is unlocked after completing the Hex quest. Unlike pretty much every other vehicle in the game, it doesn't allow you to use any weapons while mounted, but in exchange, it has 4 unique abilities of its own. The first ability, Atomi Boost, is a speed boost that quickly accelerates the bike to a top speed of 40 meters per second. This boost decreases handling and has a 1-second cooldown. The second ability, Atomi-Barrage, fires 3 salvos of 7 missiles, with these missiles dealing 1,800 heat damage, forcing a heat proc, and inflicting a 200% damage vulnerability debuff. This ability can't be activated unless there's a valid target within 30 meters, and it has a cooldown of 10 seconds. The third ability, Atomi Shadow, instantly dismounts the Atomicycle and grants 10 seconds of invisibility. This invisibility is on a 20-second cooldown, but it isn't broken by attacking, so it's surprisingly useful. The fourth and final ability, Atomi Bomb, launches the Atomicycle forward. After 2.5 seconds, or upon contact with an enemy or surface, the bike will explode, dealing 15,000 heat damage in a 15-meter radius along with a forced heat proc. Like the Barrage, this ability also has a cooldown of 10 seconds. So, with the rundown out of the way, there are a few things to note. For one, Atomi Boost is actually really good for moving through tile sets quickly, provided you can control yourself. Atomi Shadow is also an impressive survivability tool, as 10 free seconds of invisibility is nothing to scoff at, even if it is on a 20-second cooldown. The abilities of interest to us, though, are Atomi-Barrage and Atomi Bomb, as they both deal damage. On the surface, it seems like the damage loop for the Atomicycle is pretty simple. Fire the Barrage to debuff enemies, and then launch the Bike Bomb to deal big damage. This does pack a decent punch, but it's nowhere near enough for me to consider it overpowered. So then, if we're gonna make this thing OP, we have to start with a simple question. What actually affects the damage of these two abilities? Well, from my testing, the answer to that is almost nothing. Eclipse doesn't work, Vex Armor doesn't work, Rift Torrent doesn't work, Ripper's Wail doesn't work, Fireball Frenzy doesn't work, Thermal Transfer doesn't work. Hell, even the damage boost from Mecha Empowered doesn't work. This video wouldn't exist if literally nothing worked though, so I'm pleased to report that I did find a few viable options. First, let's talk about Atomi Bomb. While nothing seems to increase the 15,000 impact damage, we can boost the damage of its resulting heat proc. As far as I've tested, this can be done with 2 abilities, Roar and Valence Formation. Do note that Valence Formation does not grant the infused element to Atomi Bomb, but if you infuse heat, the heat damage bonus does apply to the bomb's heat proc. Archon Vitality also applies to Atomi Bomb, granting it 2 heat procs per enemy instead of 1. These are the only 3 things I've found that boost Atomi Bomb's damage directly, but fortunately for us, they are all multiplicative with each other. While Valence Formation and Archon Vitality don't get stronger with any stats, Roar does increase in effectiveness with power strength, so dumping into strength is the best option for increasing damage. I also think a healthy shot of duration is nice just to make sure your buffs stay active, especially because Roar goes on a 10-second cooldown once its duration ends. So we have our basic skeleton for Atomi Bomb. Roar, Valence Formation, and Archon Vitality, with a bunch of strength and some duration. But what about Atomi-Barrage? Well, strangely enough, none of these buffs apply to the Barrage's missiles. One thing does seem to boost its damage, however, getting off the bike. Yeah, for whatever reason, if you get off the bike as soon as you fire the Barrage, it deals way more damage than normal. This obviously means that you'll only fire 1 Barrage instead of 3, but the damage of that 1 Barrage is still leagues more than all 3 of them combined. The damage boost is somewhat random though, and it varies pretty wildly. The missiles can also headshot, which gives them a sizable damage boost, but that's also quite random. So then, if the damage of the missiles is finicky, we're gonna stick with Atomi Bomb. Up front, the gameplay loop seems pretty simple. Cast Roar, infuse heat, get on the bike, cast Atomi-Barrage, and launch Atomi-Bomb. Except, no, that doesn't actually work, and you'll deal no additional damage if you do it this way. Why's that? Well, it's because of a semi-obscure mechanic known as Heat Inherit. I know this is like the third time I brought this mechanic up in the last month, but it is relevant, so I do need to explain it again. So, Heat Inherit is a mechanic that dictates how heat procs combine when they come from different sources. For most damage over time effects in Warframe, individual stacks of the same status deal damage and decay independently of each other. Heat bucks this trend though, having a unique consolidation mechanic where all heat stacks deal damage together, and new heat procs both increase this damage and refresh the duration of all existing stacks. Content warning: math jump scare. This is the formula dictating how much damage a heat proc will deal every time it ticks damage, with these damage ticks being in 1 second intervals. The game first calculates the hit's modded base damage, which is the weapon's base damage after base damage mods and faction damage mods have been applied. It then runs this modded base damage through another formula, where it's first cut in half before being multiplied by things like status damage mods, heat damage mods, and faction damage mods again. There's also a section for additional multipliers, which contains things like crits, headshots, and so on. While we're here, I want to point out that Valence Formation slots itself into the heat mod part of this formula, and Roar slots itself into the faction damage part. So now that we understand the math, how does Heat Inherit affect it? Well, in short, Heat Inherit is a mechanic where the heat mod and faction mod multipliers are carried over from the first heat source to all future heat sources, instead of said sources rolling their own bonuses. To explain this better, let's do an example. Say I have a secondary with primed Heated Charge and primed Expel Grineer, which gives us a formula that looks like this. Let's inflict a heat proc with this secondary, and then we'll switch to a primary that's using Serration, Rifle Elementalist, and let's say that it also gets a crit. When this weapon inflicts a heat proc, the modded base damage, status damage, and additional multipliers are all calculated, but the heat and faction mod bonuses will not be re-rolled. Instead, they will be inherited from the first heat source, in this case being our secondary with primed Heated Charge and primed Expel Grineer. This is normally a very powerful mechanic, but when it comes to the Atomicycle, it's a massive problem. You see, while Valence Formation and Roar apply to heat procs from Atomi-Bomb, they do not apply to heat procs from Atomi-Barrage. This means that, if you use the Barrage first, its heat procs will have no heat or faction mod bonuses. If you then follow up with an Atomi-Bomb, it'll inherit the lack of bonuses from Atomi-Barrage, making your Roar and VF combo completely useless. All of this is to say that, awkwardly enough, you'll want to launch the Atomi-Bomb first, and then get back on the bike to launch the Barrage. On the bright side, the heat procs from Atomi-Barrage will inherit the faction and heat multipliers from Atomi-Bomb, on top of extending the duration of the Atomi-Bomb's heat proc. Okay, so that's everything squared away then. Cast Roar, imbue heat, launch the bomb, then launch the Barrage. It's a little awkward, but it deals a remarkable amount of damage all things considered. Honestly though, we can definitely make this better, and to do that, we're going to add 2 more variables, Unairu and Sayatid. Unairu is here for its Caustic Strike ability, which shoots out a small orb that strips enemy armor in an 8-meter radius on hit. This has obvious potential, but the 8-meter radius is kind of small, which is where Sayatid enters the picture. Sayatid is a secondary weapon that serves as a grouping tool, with its alt-fire launching an orb that spits out webs when it hits a surface. These webs reach out and grab up to 8 enemies in a 15-meter radius, pulling them towards the orb while stunning them for 6 seconds. The number of enemies grabbed scales with multi-shot, so when it comes to building the Sayatid, we're going to want to focus on that stat. Sayatid also serves an additional role as a primer, as it can be stacked with even more heat and faction damage. Because of Sayatid's high status chance, you can use it for the initial heat proc, as well as debuffing elements like Viral and Magnetic. This way, you can cast the Barrage and then Atomi-Bomb, which is a lot more comfortable. Sayatid also has an innate 1.6 meters of punch through, so it can hit multiple enemies at once. Just make sure you cast Roar and imbue the heat bonus before hitting enemies with Sayatid, or else you'll lose out on damage. Priming with the Sayatid, or any other weapon for that matter, also allows you to take advantage of heat bonuses that are higher than Valence Formation, like Ripper's Wail and Fireball Frenzy. You can also give these buffs to allies, including companions, which allows them to prime for you as well. Do be aware that your companion is shelved when you're actually on the Atomicycle though, so they'll have to do the priming beforehand. Still, external priming opens up the strat to several other Warframes, but as Lavos is my GOAT, I'm going to be sticking with him. It may be suboptimal, sure, but I find him to be the least annoying to work with, as external priming is totally optional on Lavos only. So then, our order is now the following: cast Roar, imbue Heat, group up enemies with Cyatid's alt fire, hit them a few times with Cyatid's primary fire, cast Caustic Strike, launch the Barrage, and then launch the Atomi Bomb. I know that sounds like a lot, but in practice it's really not too bad, especially because oftentimes casting everything is actually overkill. All of these tools together net you such high damage that it's more than enough for most trash mobs, so it's often the case that you can leave out 1 or 2 steps and still kill everything the blast touches. Alright, we now have all of the pieces in place. Roar for faction damage, Valence Formation for heat damage, Archon Vitality to double the bomb's heat procs, Cyatid for grouping, Unairu for armor removal, and if necessary, Atomi-Barrage for damage vulnerability. Just make sure that, if you're not priming with Cyatid, you use Atomi Bomb before Atomi-Barrage. I do want to mention an important caveat to all this though: status reduction. For those who might be unaware, status reduction is a mechanic where certain enemies, like Acolytes and Necromechs, cap out at 4 stacks of any individual status effect. This means that if you detonate an Atomi Bomb and then fire a Barrage, the Barrage will overwrite the bomb's heat proc, resulting in a loss in damage. Naturally, as soon as I put all of this stuff together, I immediately went to try and one-shot Fowrid. Unfortunately, this rat is completely status immune, so it can't even be hit with the heat proc. As such, I went and took my anger out on the Sergeant, though that's hardly impressive. Real quick, before we get into the montage, I'm going to show my builds on screen now. For Lavos, you'll want to pump high strength along with some duration. For the Cyatid, I'm building high multi-shot to grab more enemies, alongside heat damage mods for Heat Inherit, as well as Viral and Magnetic for debuffing. With all that said, it's time for the big plot twist. This video was all just a thinly veiled excuse to establish relevant context for using Viola's theme. So, I think I can say this little side quest has made the Atomicycle Steel Path viable. Is it good? Not really, but it is very funny, and that's ultimately what matters on this channel. Well, that, and my boyfriend is drawn to the worst items in every video game he plays, so I gotta lend him a hand sometimes. Alright, that's it for today's video. I know this one was on the shorter side, but after making Analyzing the Murmur, I'm kinda burnt out on this stuff, so I wanted to work on something more bite-sized. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments, and if you enjoyed, feel free to like and sub and all that. I have a Discord you can join if you want to experience an internet aneurysm, and I stream right here on YouTube if you want to stop by. I also want to give a huge thank you to my members for funding this content, as this channel would not be able to operate full-time without them. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time when I pick up a 6-pack and booze cruise into a parked car.